The relentless November rain hammered against the windshield of Ellie Morgan's 10-year-old Honda Civic as she navigated the slick roads of suburban Minneapolis. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, and her tires splashed through growing puddles on the asphalt. She was exhausted after her double shift at Mercy Hospital, where she worked as a nurse in the pediatric ward. Her shoulders ached, and her eyes burned from the strain of 12 hours on her feet. At 34, Ellie had grown accustomed to the grind. A single mother to her 12-year-old daughter, Zoe, she juggled work, bills, and parenthood with the determination that had defined her since her husband's death from cancer 4 years ago. The hospital's fluorescent lights and the constant beeping of monitors had long since become the soundtrack to her life. "Just make it home," she whispered to herself, squinting through the blur of water cascading down her windshield. The forecast had warned of the season's first major storm system, but she hadn't anticipated its ferocity. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning briefly illuminated the darkening evening sky. As she rounded a bend on Lakeside Drive, her headlights caught something at the roadside ahead. A black Mercedes with its hazard lights blinking feebly. A figure in a dark overcoat stood beside it, shoulders hunched against the driving rain. Ellie's first instinct was to drive past. It was getting dark, she was alone, and Zoe was waiting at her neighbor's house. But something made her slow down. The man looked older, maybe in his 60s, and completely drenched. He was fumbling with his phone, the screen's blue light reflecting off his rain-streaked glasses. Ellie pulled over about 20 feet ahead and hesitated, her hand hovering over the gear shift. Her late husband's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "Always help if you can, Elle. That's what makes us human." With a deep breath, she grabbed her rain jacket from the passenger seat, pulled up her hood, and stepped out into the downpour. "Need some help?" she called over the drumming of the rain. The man turned, relief washing over his weathered face. "Oh, thank goodness. My tire blew out, and I can't get a signal out here to call for help." As she approached, Ellie noticed his expensive but understated watch and the fine quality of his coat. His silver hair was plastered to his forehead, and despite his evident frustration, there was a gentleness in his eyes. "I'm Richard," he said, extending a wet hand. "Richard Calloway." "Ellie Morgan," she replied, shaking it briefly. "Let's take a look." The front passenger tire was completely flat, the rubber shredded from what looked like a nasty encounter with a pothole. Rain pooled around their feet as they surveyed the damage. "Do you have a spare?" Ellie asked, already moving toward the trunk. Richard nodded, fumbling with his keys. "Yes, but I'm afraid I've never had to change one myself. My wife usually handles these things, but she's out of town visiting our daughter." Ellie smiled despite the rain soaking through her jacket. "Well, you're in luck. My dad was a mechanic. He made sure I could change a tire before he let me get my license." They worked together in the downpour, Ellie directing Richard where to place the jack and how to loosen the lug nuts while she held an umbrella he'd retrieved from his trunk. Her scrubs were soon soaked through beneath her jacket, and her hands grew numb with cold, but she worked methodically, the muscle memory from her father's lessons guiding her movements. "What do you do, Ellie?" Richard asked, as she tightened the final lug nut on the spare tire. "I'm a pediatric nurse at Mercy," she replied, wiping rain from her eyes with the back of her hand. "Just finished a double shift." Richard's expression changed, a mixture of surprise and respect crossing his face. "And you still stopped to help a stranger in the rain?" Ellie shrugged, lowering the car with the jack. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Richard said quietly, almost to himself. "No, they wouldn't." With the spare tire securely in place, they packed up the tools. Ellie's fingers were stiff with cold, and she couldn't stop shivering. "Thank you," Richard said earnestly, handing her a business card. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Please let me pay you for your trouble." Ellie waved away the offer. "No need. Just glad I could help." She pocketed the card without looking at it and hurried back to her car, the cold seeping deep into her bones. As she pulled away, watching the Mercedes' tail lights recede in her rearview mirror, Ellie had no idea that this chance encounter in the rain would change her life forever. Chapter 2. The Proposition. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Ellie sat at her small kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee and staring at Richard Calloway's business card. The embossed letters read, Calloway Development, Richard Calloway, CEO. Below was an address in one of Minneapolis's most prestigious business districts. "Mom, I'm going to be late," Zoe called from the bathroom, her voice cutting through Ellie's thoughts. "Coming, honey." Ellie tucked the card into her pocket and hurried to help her daughter finish getting ready for school. Zoe was the spitting image of her father. Same warm brown eyes, same dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. At 12, she was already showing signs of the woman she would become. Thoughtful, determined, and unfailingly kind. Ellie felt the familiar pang of grief that her husband wasn't here to see it. After dropping Zoe at school, Ellie drove to the hospital for her shift, the events of the previous evening gradually fading into the background as she immersed herself in the familiar rhythm of checking vitals, administering medications, and comforting scared children and worried parents. It was just after 2 p.m. when the hospital receptionist called up to the pediatric ward. "Ellie, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Richard Calloway." Surprised, Ellie made her way downstairs during her break. Richard stood in the lobby, looking much more composed than the drenched figure from the night before. He wore a tailored gray suit and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. "Ellie," he greeted her warmly, "I hope you don't mind my dropping by. I wanted to thank you properly for your help last night." "It really wasn't necessary, Mr. Calloway," she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Richard, please. And actually, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Do you have a moment?" They sat in the hospital cafe, Richard declining coffee while Ellie gratefully accepted a fresh cup. "I've been thinking about our encounter," Richard began, his fingers lightly tapping on the portfolio. "You mentioned you're a single mother?" Ellie nodded, a hint of wariness creeping into her expression. "I don't mean to pry," he continued quickly. "It's just that, well, I've been looking for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Ellie repeated, confused. Richard opened the portfolio and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a beautiful craftsman-style house with a wraparound porch and a large oak tree in the front yard. The house was painted a soft blue with white trim, and flower beds lined the walkway to the front door. "This is one of my company's properties," Richard explained. "It's in a neighborhood called Maple Grove, about 20 minutes from here. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement. It's a wonderful area with excellent schools." Ellie stared at the photo, then back at Richard. "I don't understand." "I want to give it to you," he said simply. Ellie's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Excuse me?" Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Let me explain. My wife, Helen, passed away 6 months ago. We were married for 42 years. "I'm so sorry," Ellie murmured, setting down her cup. "Thank you. It's been difficult," Richard continued. "The night you helped me, I had just come from visiting her grave. It was our anniversary." He paused, collecting himself. "Helen always believed in acts of kindness. She said they were the threads that hold our society together. When you stopped to help me, no expectation of reward after working a double shift in that terrible storm, it reminded me so much of her." Ellie listened, still bewildered. "I've been looking for a way to honor Helen's memory," Richard explained. "She and I started our company together, building homes for families. It seemed fitting to give a home to someone who embodies the values she held dear. Someone who puts others first, even when it's difficult." "Mr. Calloway, Richard, I appreciate the sentiment, but I can't possibly accept a house from you," Ellie said, her practical nature asserting itself. "It's too much. We barely know each other." Richard smiled softly. "I understand your hesitation, but I've done my research this morning. You've worked at this hospital for 8 years. Your colleagues speak highly of you. You volunteer at the free clinic downtown once a month, and from what I can tell, you're raising a wonderful daughter on your own." Ellie shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to be flattered or concerned by his investigation. "The house has been sitting empty for months," Richard continued. "It was one of the last projects Helen oversaw before she got sick. She always said it needed a family who would appreciate it. I believe that's you and your daughter." "I have a mortgage," Ellie said weakly, her mind racing. "My apartment," All details we can sort out, Richard assured her. I'm not asking for anything in return, Ellie. This isn't a transaction. It's a gift, freely given. Ellie's break was nearly over and her head was spinning. I need time to think about this. It's overwhelming. Richard nodded, sliding a folder across the table. Of course. Here's all the information about the house, including the deed paperwork. Take your time. My number's on the card I gave you. Call me when you've made a decision. As he rose to leave, he added softly, Helen would have liked you very much, Ellie Morgan. After he left, Ellie sat motionless in the cafe, the folder untouched before her, wondering if she was dreaming. Chapter 3. The Decision. Mom, are you serious? This is for real? Zoe's eyes were wide as dinner plates as she flipped through the photos of the house. They sat on their worn couch in their small two-bedroom apartment. The folder from Richard Calloway spread open on the coffee table. 3 days had passed since Richard's visit to the hospital. Ellie had carried the folder in her bag, periodically taking it out to stare at the documents inside before tucking it away again. She'd run internet searches on Richard Calloway and Calloway Development, finding that they were indeed legitimate. A well-respected family-owned business with a 30-year history in Minneapolis. Apparently so, Ellie replied, still struggling to believe it herself. Mr. Calloway seems sincere. But why us? Zoe asked, picking up the property deed with Richard's signature already in place, just waiting for Ellie's. Ellie explained the story of the flat tire in the rain, Richard's late wife, and his explanation about honoring her memory. So we'd just own it? A whole house? Zoe's voice was filled with wonder. Their apartment, while comfortable enough, was cramped. Zoe's bedroom barely fit her bed and desk, and the walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors arguing most evenings. If I sign these papers, yes, Ellie confirmed, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. What's stopping you? Zoe asked, her youthful perspective cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Ellie sighed, running a hand through her hair. It feels wrong somehow, like we don't deserve it. Why not? Zoe challenged, showing wisdom beyond her years. You help people every day, Mom. You work so hard. And you always tell me that kindness matters more than anything. Isn't that what Mr. Calloway is doing? Being kind? Ellie smiled at her daughter's logic, but doubt still lingered. There's also pride, honey. Taking charity. Is this about Dad? Zoe interrupted softly. Ellie fell silent. Was it? Since David's death, she'd been determined to stand on her own, to prove she could provide for Zoe without help. The life insurance had paid off most of their debts, but there had been nothing left over. She'd refused financial assistance from her parents and David's, insisting they could manage. Maybe a little, she admitted. Dad always wanted us to have a house with a yard. Zoe reached for her mother's hand. I think he'd want you to say yes, Mom. That night, after Zoe went to bed, Ellie called her closest friend Maria, a fellow nurse who had been her rock during David's illness and after his death. He's just giving you a house? Maria repeated incredulously after Ellie explained the situation. No strings attached? That's what he says, Ellie confirmed. I've checked him out. He seems legitimate. His company is well established and he's known for philanthropy. And you're hesitating because... Ellie sighed. It feels like too much. Like I don't deserve it. Oh, honey. Maria's voice softened. If anyone deserves a break, it's you. After everything with David, the way you've raised Zoe on your own, maybe the universe is finally cutting you some slack. I don't believe in the universe handing out favors, Ellie replied, but she smiled despite herself. Then believe in human kindness, Maria countered. This man lost his wife. He's trying to honor her memory by doing something meaningful. By refusing, aren't you denying him that chance? Ellie hadn't considered it from that angle. I suppose I am. Go see the house, Maria suggested. Take Zoe. If it feels right, sign the papers. If not, politely decline. But don't say no just because you're afraid to accept help. The next day was Saturday, and following Maria's advice, Ellie called Richard. He sounded pleased to hear from her and arranged to meet them at the house that afternoon. The Maple Grove neighborhood was exactly as Richard had described. Quiet streets lined with mature trees, well-maintained homes with children playing in front yards, and a sense of community that was palpable even from the car. As they pulled up to the address, Ellie's heart raced. The house was even more beautiful in person than in the photographs. The late afternoon sunlight bathed the blue exterior in a warm glow, and the sprawling oak tree in the front yard cast dappled shadows across the porch. Richard was waiting for them, casually dressed in khakis and a sweater that made him look more like a friendly grandfather than a CEO. He greeted Zoe warmly, asking about school and her interests as they walked up the flagstone path to the front door. "It was built in 1935, Richard explained as he unlocked the door, "but we've completely updated the interior while preserving its character." The inside of the house took Ellie's breath away. Hardwood floors gleamed in the entryway, leading to a spacious living room with a stone fireplace. The kitchen was modern but warm, with maple cabinets and a large island. Zoe immediately ran upstairs to explore the bedrooms, her excited exclamations echoing down the stairwell. "The master bedroom has an ensuite bathroom," Richard pointed out, "and there's a study that could be perfect for Zoe as she gets older." Ellie moved through the rooms in a daze, her fingers trailing along countertops and door frames. The house felt solid, permanent, everything their apartment wasn't. "The backyard is Helen's pride and joy," Richard said softly, leading Ellie through French doors off the kitchen. Outside was a garden oasis, flowering shrubs, a small vegetable patch, and a patio with a pergola covered in climbing roses. "She designed it herself." "It's beautiful," Ellie whispered, emotion catching in her throat. Richard watched her for a moment, then said gently, "You're still hesitating." Ellie nodded, unable to put her feelings into words. "Let me tell you something about Helen," Richard said, gesturing to a wrought iron bench beneath a maple tree. They sat, listening to the distant sound of Zoe's footsteps overhead. "When we started our business, we were struggling. Our first development was on the verge of failure. Then a banker took a chance on us, extended our loan when he had every reason not to. That act of faith saved our company." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Helen never forgot that. She said we had a responsibility to pass on that same kindness. Over the years, we've tried. Scholarships, donations to causes we believed in. But Helen always wanted to do something more personal." Richard turned to face Ellie directly. "This house was her last project before she got sick. She put her heart into it. When she knew she wouldn't recover, she made me promise to find the right person for it. Someone who embodied the kindness that had saved us all those years ago." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm not just giving you a house, Ellie. You're giving me the chance to fulfill my promise to my wife, to complete her final project the way she would have wanted." In that moment, something shifted in Ellie's heart. The gift wasn't about charity or deserving. It was about connection, about one person recognizing something valuable in another and honoring it. "Mom!" Zoe's voice broke the moment as she burst into the backyard. "There's a window seat in one of the bedrooms. Can you believe it? It's just like in my books." Ellie looked from her daughter's shining face to Richard's hopeful one. She took a deep breath and made her decision. The December sun cast long shadows across the front yard of the Blue Craftsman house as Ellie and Zoe carried the last of their boxes inside. 3 weeks had passed since their visit with Richard, and the reality of their new life was finally sinking in. The paperwork had been surprisingly straightforward. Richard had connections at the bank who helped Ellie navigate the transfer of the deed and the selling of her apartment. There had been no hidden catches, no last-minute revelations, just a genuine gift, freely given. "I think that's everything from the car," Zoe announced, setting down a box labeled "Kitchen" on the counter. She spun in a slow circle, still in awe of their new surroundings. "I can't believe this is ours." "It's going to take some getting used to," Ellie agreed, unpacking dishes into cabinets that could have held 3 times what they owned. Their furniture looked almost comically small in the spacious rooms, but Richard had insisted they take their time making the house their own. "It's not about filling it with things," he'd said. "It's about filling it with life." The doorbell rang, and Zoe raced to answer it. Maria stood on the porch with a potted plant and a bottle of wine. "Housewarming gifts," she announced, stepping inside and looking around appreciatively. "My goodness, Ellie, this place is gorgeous." As Maria helped unpack kitchen items, Ellie found herself sharing Richard and Helen's story with new appreciation. I still can't believe it sometimes, she admitted, that a flat tire in the rain could lead to all this. It wasn't just a flat tire, Maria corrected her. It was you stopping to help when most people would have driven by. You made a choice that night, Elle. The kitchen gradually took shape as they unpacked, the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that were larger than their entire kitchen in the apartment. Zoe's laughter echoed through the house as she discovered yet another delightful feature, a reading nook tucked under the stairs, a built-in bookcase that spanned an entire wall, a back porch swing that faced the garden. "Mom!" Zoe called from upstairs. "Come see what I found in my closet." Ellie and Maria climbed the stairs to find Zoe standing in her new bedroom closet, which was nearly the size of her old room. She was holding a small wooden box with intricate carvings. "It was on the top shelf," Zoe explained, carefully opening the lid. Inside was a collection of polished stones in various colors: amethyst, rose quartz, tiger's eye, and others Ellie couldn't name. "There's a note," Zoe said, unfolding a small piece of paper. "For the young dreamer who lives here next, may these treasures inspire your imagination. Helen." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Even now, months after her death, Helen was still giving gifts to strangers she'd never met, but somehow knew would come. "She must have left it here knowing the house would go to someone special," Maria said softly. More visitors arrived throughout the afternoon. Colleagues from the hospital, Zoe's friends and their parents, neighbors introducing themselves with cookies and casseroles. Mrs. Pemberton from next door brought a handmade quilt and stories of the neighborhood's history. The Wilsons from across the street came with their children, 2 boys close to Zoe's age, who immediately invited her to join the neighborhood kickball game on weekends. By evening, the house had begun to feel less like a showplace and more like a home. The kitchen counter was crowded with casserole dishes and desserts. The living room floor was dotted with discarded wrapping paper from housewarming gifts. Zoe had already arranged her books on the built-in shelves, organizing them by color in a rainbow pattern that made Ellie smile. As the last guests departed, Ellie stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The neighborhood was quiet now, porch lights beginning to flicker on along the street, holiday decorations twinkling in the growing dusk. A car pulled up, and Richard stepped out, carrying a small wrapped package. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, climbing the steps to join her. "Not at all," Ellie assured him. "Please, come in." Inside, Zoe was arranging Helen stones on her windowsill, where the morning light would catch them. She greeted Richard with a hug that seemed to surprise and please him. "I brought something for your new home," he said, handing the package to Ellie. She unwrapped it to find a silver frame containing a photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair, standing in the garden behind the house. "Helen," Richard explained simply. Ellie's eyes filled with tears as she realized the magnitude of the gift, not just the house, but the sharing of memory, the inclusion in something deeply personal. "I thought she should be here," Richard continued. "She would have loved to see the house filled with life again." "Thank you," Ellie whispered, carefully placing the frame on the mantel. "For everything." Richard stayed for dinner, sharing stories of Helen with Ellie and Zoe over a meal cobbled together from the housewarming offerings. It was the first time he had spoken so freely about his wife since her death, and Ellie could see the therapeutic effect it had on him. As he told Zoe about Helen's passion for gardening and her famous blueberry pie recipe, his eyes brightened with fondness rather than sorrow. "She kept a garden journal," he said, setting down his fork. "Notes about what to plant and when, sketches of her designs. I found it when I was going through her things." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "I thought you might like to have it, Ellie, for the spring." "I'd be honored," Ellie replied, touched by his generosity. "Though I should warn you I've never had much luck with plants." Richard chuckled. "Helen always said gardens aren't about luck. They're about patience and attention, listening to what the plants need." He looked around the kitchen, nodding with satisfaction. "I think she'd be pleased with how you're settling in." Zoe piped up. "I told Mom we should get a dog now that we have a yard. Helen would want a dog here, right?" Richard laughed, a full, genuine sound that Ellie suspected he hadn't made in some time. Helen would absolutely want a dog here. She was always trying to convince me to get one, but my travel schedule made it impractical. See, Mom, Zoe said triumphantly. We'll discuss it after the holidays, Ellie promised, unable to suppress her own smile. As Richard prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Helen always said a house needs to be lived in to become a home. I think this one is well on its way. I hope you'll visit often, Ellie said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. You're always welcome here. Richard nodded, emotion flickering across his face. I'd like that. After he left, Ellie helped Zoe prepare for bed in her new room. As she tucked her daughter in, Zoe reached for her hand. Mom? I think this was meant to be. Us finding this house. Ellie smoothed Zoe's hair back from her forehead. What makes you say that? It just feels right, Zoe said simply. Like we belong here. Later, after Zoe had finally fallen asleep, Ellie wandered through the quiet house, touching walls and door frames, still marveling at the turn their lives had taken. She made her way to the window seat in the living room, looking out at the neighborhood that was now theirs. The enormity of the change in their lives was still overwhelming, but for the first time since David's death, she felt a sense of permanence, of possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. How's the first night in the mansion? Ellie smiled, typing back. It's not a mansion. It's home. As she set down her phone, her gaze fell on Helen's photograph. In the silver frame, the woman's eyes seemed to hold a knowing warmth, as if she approved of the new family that had come to inhabit the space she had loved. Outside, a light snow began to fall, dusting the oak tree and the garden with a blanket of white. Ellie thought about the chain of events that had brought them here. A flat tire in the rain, a chance encounter, a moment of kindness that had seemed so small at the time. She remembered something her father used to say, "You never know which act of kindness might change someone's life, yours or theirs." In helping Richard that rainy night, she had unknowingly changed the course of her own life and Zoe's. Ellie found herself moving to the kitchen, where she opened one of the barely filled drawers and pulled out a notepad and pen. She began to write, "Dear Helen, we've never met, but today I felt your presence in every corner of this beautiful home you created. I wanted to thank you for the gift you've given us, not just these walls and rooms, but the care and thought you put into making this place special. I promise to tend your garden, to fill these rooms with laughter, and to continue the legacy of kindness you and Richard have shown us. With gratitude, Ellie." She folded the note and tucked it behind Helen's photograph on the mantel. It wasn't a letter Helen would ever read, but writing it had helped Ellie process the whirlwind of emotions the day had brought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a different commute to work, helping Zoe adjust to the prospect of a new school after winter break, learning the rhythms of a different neighborhood. But for now, in the quiet of their new home, Ellie allowed herself to simply be grateful. She reached for the hospital scrubs she'd laid out for her shift the next day, smoothing the familiar fabric with her hands. Some things wouldn't change. Her work, her dedication to her patients, her love for Zoe. But now, at the end of each long day, she would return to this place. This gift that had come from an act of kindness on a rainy November evening. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake unique and perfect, covering the world in possibilities. And inside, wrapped in the warmth of her new home, Ellie Morgan finally allowed herself to believe that sometimes life could indeed surprise you with unexpected blessings. That sometimes changing a tire in the rain could lead to changing your entire life.